And I always try to think, okay, the seat at the table, for example, it came about because of being mentored by Mentrafosa Ramano and the impact it had. I had prayed actually for mentorship like that. I've been mentored. I believe in mentorship. I believe firmly in the impact it can have in someone's life, but I was praying really for mentorship that was very personal, where somebody takes you in. It's not just a coffee. It's not just sitting with Thato and saying, how are you? How's your career? Try this, try that. But actually being entrenched in somebody's life and understanding what it takes. Going through my board exams, not passing the first time around. I didn't pass my first board the first time. And I remember how traumatic the experience was, because when you're in an audit firm, it's a big day. The day the results come out, they print your results in an envelope and they give it to everybody. And we were all there and everyone opens the envelope and they're like, I passed. And I opened my envelope. I was like, you're just shocked. You're in the middle of a crowd. You just don't know how to feel. We're always looking at the higher ups as if they're supposed to save us. And I think we have that syndrome in South Africa where you want to be saved. It's like Nelson Mandela is saving us. Cyril is saving us. Nobody's saving you. You need to do it for yourself. You need to plug the gaps. Nobody will understand the gaps of people from Northwest. Atswana young lady better than you will.
Yeah.
A young girl from Pretoria, I will understand their challenges more than you will, And it's like God has put us in the spaces we grew up in, the spaces we are in now, to say you have the solution for the problem you've experienced. So don't try and solve other people's problems. Solve the problems you've experienced in your community. Because if we all do that, then we're plugging the gaps,
Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome to Safe Space, a series brought to you by Tsogang Batong. I'm honored to welcome our guest, Mothathe Sewelo. Welcome, Mothathe.
Thank you, Tata. Thank you for having me. I'm so honored.
Thank you. Thank you for making the time. So Mothathe is a chartered accountant, transformative leader, and social inclusion advocate. With international qualifications from Fordham University, executive leadership training from top global institutions, she blends world-class education with hands-on experience driving impactful change on the ground. As head of trade finance and international banking at a leading South African bank, Mothathe plays a role in facilitating cross-border payments and formulating trade solutions. A SAICA Top 35 Under 35 nominee, she is recognized for her leadership in advancing gender equality and mentoring young people. She sits on various boards such as Vuga's Coco, Heartlines, and Gender-Based Violence Fund, which impacts marginalized communities. As chairperson of A Seat at a Table, an organization that I'm also a beneficiary of, she has empowered over 200 young people and is on a mission to reach 1 million people and 1 million youth and women by 2030. Welcome, Mothathe. Take us back to where it all began. What were the key experiences and moments that influenced where and who you are today growing up?
Thank you, Tata. Whenever we have events, I'm going to start with a sidebar, right? Whenever we have events and we're reading people's bios, these very accomplished people, you see it in their faces. They're just like, oh my gosh, like, why are you doing that? And when you're reading my bio, I was like, oh my gosh, because it's so weird to hear your story when people tell it. Yeah. But to your point about where it all started, really, I'm a very simple girl from Attridgeville. It's a township in Pretoria. Grew up in a home of four: my mother, my father, and my older brother. These are the people that have shaped me. Obviously, I have, family, my aunt. I was also raised by her, and I just come from a very loving home, a home where I was taught to think about others and, always try to help others. You think outside of yourself. I went to humble schools. I went to school in Lodium, my primary and high school. And I learned a lot, being a young, ambitious Black woman, a Black young girl. I had big ambitions for my life. I was very independent. I don't know why. I don't know how. I believe that God really makes everyone according to what he wants you to fulfill in the world. He kind of equips you and gives you the skills that you need somehow, I was very independent. I remember when I was in primary school, going into high school, and I was looking for bursaries because, I wanted to go to these, elite schools, your St. Mary's, your Crawfords, Cornwall Hill. And I applied for the bursaries and I went through the process. And I remember at the time, my parents didn't have a car. So we were going, using taxis and going to these schools for interviews and so forth. And I remember, it was so weird. Now when I look back, I'm like, why the hell did you want to go there? What was going on in your mind as a young person, And I had the privilege, I guess, to be in a program with UP. And in that program, it was a math program, and they kind of put us together, kids from different schools, public schools, private schools. And I guess that's where my aspirations came from, And I realized the importance of exposure, because I only wanted to go to those schools because I was exposed to kids from those schools, and I felt like I knew that there was better, I never got into the schools. I went through my normal public education. I was one of the top students when I matriculated.
Congrats.
Yeah, those kids in the newspaper. You're like, I'm in the newspaper. When I went to fetch my results at school, your certificate and stuff, I was like, I'm in the newspaper. Well, it's the local newspaper, but I was like, okay, cool. That's nice. I was a beneficiary of a bursary from PwC, and that really shaped my world, becoming a chartered accountant. I think if I didn't get that bursary, I probably would have done something else. But it was just so intentional that I was kind of boxed in for purpose, to say you should become a chartered accountant. I wanted to become an actuary. I'm very glad I didn't become an actuary. I know you are actuary in, profession. But I think chartered accountant was more suited for my personality and what I was trying to achieve.
In what way?
I think, I'm a very inquisitive person, right? I don't think I want to do one thing. Actually it's like mathematician, Chartered accountants, like, you can be tax, you can be audit, you can be finance, you can be, CFO, investment banker, auditor. You can be so many different things from one qualification, right? And that is who I am. I like to do different things, and I like to be exposed to different people, and I like to help different people, I think from my journey, going through my board exams, not passing the first time around. I didn't pass my first board the first time. And I remember how traumatic the experience was, because when you're in an audit firm, it's a big day. The day the results come out, they print your results in an envelope and they give it to everybody. And we were all there, and everyone opens the envelope and they're like, I passed. And I opened my envelope. I was like, you're just shocked. You're in the middle of a crowd. You just don't know how to feel, And I think it's a lot of experiences in my life where I felt like excluded or kind of outcast that makes me such a social inclusion advocate. You spoke about it in my bio, and it's something I live by. I live by two sayings: is be the change you want to see in the world, be the mentor you wanted, be the person you felt like you needed when you were younger or when you were in a specific position, right? And the second one is you lose 100% of the shots you don't take. Right. So anyone who knows me knows that I'm a go-getter. I will ask for things. My boss is always just like, whenever he's speaking to me, it's just like, I know she's gonna ask me for something, So I always put myself out there, but I always try to think about a young Mothathe somewhere in Atteridgeville who doesn't have the access. I grew up, I didn't know a chartered accountant, I didn't know an actuary, I didn't know a lawyer. My parents are public servants, and they taught me contentment, they taught me the drive that I have, they taught me to strive for the best, because that's what they did in their lives. And I think that it's something that I hold close and dear to me. And I always try to think, okay, the seat at the table, for example, it came about because of being mentored by Mothathe Sewelo and the impact it had. I had prayed actually for mentorship like that. I've been mentored. I believe in mentorship. I believe firmly in the impact it can have in someone's life, but I was praying really for mentorship that was very personal, where somebody takes you in. It's not just a coffee. It's not just sitting with Tate and saying, how are you? How's your career? Try this, try that. But actually being entrenched in somebody's life and understanding what it takes to be a respected person, to be a person that is knowledgeable. What kind of life does a woman like that live? How is she at home? How is she in spaces with her friends, with her family? And it was just such an enlightening experience, being mentored so personally, for somebody to take you in to their vulnerable spaces, into their personal spaces. And it was just thinking, I've been privileged. I always think, I've been privileged to get this experience. How does somebody else access the same experience? And that's how a seat at the table came about, because we were sitting there and I'm like, Mam Trifosa is such a powerhouse, a person who loves to develop young people. And it's like, how do we amplify this? How do we get a Tato? How do we get Portia, all these people that are part of the community we now have? How do we get them into these rooms where last month, obviously it's Feb now, but we had the event with Bunki, that's a powerhouse. That's somebody who's accomplished, who's walked the miles. And we're saying, Tato, come, learn from her. We don't all have the opportunities to be with these people on a day-to-day basis. There's a lot of young people inboxing, accomplished people, and they have lives, they have families over and above their achievements, and it was just like, it was just mutually beneficial, because these people obviously want to give back. They want to plow back to youth. They want to plow back to women, but they can't do it on a one-on-one basis, with everyone. Everyone is inboxing them. Everyone wants to learn from a Bunki, from a Mamzibu, from, the many people that we've had at sit at the table. But we're saying, let us bring young people around the table to learn from each other, firstly, because one thing that even Mamtra has taught us is peer mentorship. We're always looking at the higher ups as if they're supposed to save us. And I think we have that syndrome in South Africa where you want to be saved. It's like Nelson Mandela is saving us. Cyril is saving us. Nobody's saving you, You need to do it for yourself. You need to plug the gaps. Nobody will understand the gaps of people from Northwest, a Tswana young lady, better than you will. A young girl from Pretoria I will understand their challenges more than you will, you know? And it's like God has put us in the spaces we grew up in, the spaces we are in now, to say, you have the solution for the problem you've experienced. So don't try and solve other people's problems. Solve the problems you've experienced in your community. Because if we all do that, then we're plugging the gaps, you know, we are closing those things that we're like, what did you experience as a young person that you feel like was unjust in a way? How are you paving the way and closing that gap to say, oh, I was young, I chose to be a chartered accountant. I had no idea what that was, you know, and PwC did a great job in trying. You know, I was young in high school, and they did a lot of initiatives where they trained us just basic etiquette, like where a fork sits, where a knife sits. You take that for granted. And I always think about that to say, you know, a lot of grads come into the system, they're not trained. I don't take it for granted because I know I was trained. There was intentionality. And that's what I love about the CA profession, especially when you're doing it through audit, is there's that intentionality in how they train you. But that doesn't happen. Like, I work for a bank now, and I'm like, oh my gosh, who teaches this young people just basic etiquette, basic work ethic? There are things that you're not taught because of where you come from, and you are expected to know. You're expected to know to network. You're expected to know how to ask a mentor to mentor you. How would you know that? You know, so I always think about that, and I'm always trying to say, how do we teach people? We don't assume that Tato knows how to do this. Tato knows when she's working as an actuary, this is what you must do. This is how you carry yourself. This is how you present yourself. This is how you speak. This is what you say. This is what you don't say, because we don't know those things. So it's important that we all try to bridge the gap. We all try to go back to our communities and help someone and take somebody under our wing. You know, it's just one person. You don't have to do 10 million things. And I learned this when I was on the FACET IWFSA program, the Executive Development Program through Duke CE. And we went to this NGO, and the ladies were talking about how they consolidate NGOs in Singapore, right? So you have different NGOs, but they're consolidated, and they kind of have a forum that is heard by government, they take inputs from them. And you actually start to understand the importance of that work, right? Because NGOs are filling the gap in society, in communities, and specifically because you can't expect government to do everything for everyone. You know, they're limited resources, but NGOs play that part. But the biggest principle that they were preaching there is the power of one. One of the ladies spoke about that, and she was like, you know, you do all these things, but there's one person you will impact. You might do it for 100 people, but there'll be that one person you impact, and that one person becomes a Tato, and she starts a podcast, and it has impact in many people's lives, right? One person watches your podcast out of the 2,000 viewers, whatever, or 200,000 viewers, and that person is impacted genuinely, you know, and they go out and break many, they shatter ceilings, you know, they break curses in their family. And it's even biblical, you know, Jesus will leave the many sheep for that one sheep that's lost, you know. So we just need to be more intentional as people to say, what can I do to impact one person? You know, because when you always talk about giving back, it's like, so many people, I don't have time, I don't do this. But it's like, just one person. You just need to go to one person in your community. You can buy them school shoes. You can mentor them. You can teach them, because that person could be the key for many other people, you know? So yeah, I think for me, it's just, that is something that drives me. That is from my upbringing, from my experiences. I'm very big on including others. And hence I've coined the social inclusion advocate term to say, include others, see others. In your office, there's a new person, see them, hear them, talk to them. Just make them feel seen, make them feel heard. And I think that's the biggest thing in our current youth that we experience, that all the depression, all the mental health issues stem from just feeling like you're not seen, you're not heard, you're just a number in a community, you're just a number at work. And that's not the case. You're a person, you are Tato. No one is Tato better than Tato.
And I always say that, as you progress in life, as you take care of the material things, like for instance, if you're able to break that cycle of poverty and become a CA, like you said, then you almost reach a point where you now have to look inwards and develop like what's inside of you, right? Because you find that growing up, as a smart person, like you said, you use your accomplishments as a source of validation. But a natural part of growing up is experiencing failure, right? So you speak about how your passion for social inclusion is influenced by your experience of exclusion. Can you just tell us a bit more in terms of how you experienced the exclusion and, which led to you having it as a passion now?
Yeah, I touched on the education bit, being somebody that was really pro-education. I was raised in a house where it's just like, study, do it, and my mom always preached, you can do it now, you can do it later, but you'll have to do it, so rather do it now and get it over and done with. And that was just more in terms of studying. It's like, if you don't study, you don't pass. You have to then restudy and then get over it. But yeah, I think education was the first part, being a young person, feeling like, why can't I go to a St. Mary's? Why can't I go to a Cornwall Hill? Why? If you are determined, you are smart, why does finance have to be a barrier to entry or access, or who or whatever? I was just a young girl from Attridgeville, didn't know how you get into these schools, just applied, went for interviews, had no idea. How do you even prep for these interviews? How do you position yourself? How do you don't know, and I think when I look back, I'm just like, how would a person know? I always just think, how are you expected to know? It's like there's a lot of expectations about how you are supposed to be, but you are not taught beforehand, and it's kind of very unfortunate. And that is something that for me, I still carry, in the sense that, okay, you went through that experience, it's not going to change. You can't go back to being 13, 14, going back to high school. But what are you doing to kind of say, to prepare the younger Mothathe that would be going through the same experience? So those are some of the things that I feel like I felt excluded from a system that I didn't know how to overcome, And you also, like I said, you go into these audit firms and there are a lot of people and they're articulate and they know what they're doing and you have no clue. I look back and I'm like, I didn't know half of the things I know now. If I did, I probably would have done things a bit differently. And those are some of the things that the exclusionary part, where it's not intentional exclusion, like somebody's trying to be mean to you, but it's unintended exclusion that just doesn't think of systems, that don't think, how would a person know? How are you expected to know when you start a job that this is what I do, this is how I show up, when I do this, it's wrong. When I do this, it's right, right? And I'm not talking about just basic, come to work on time, do your job, blah, blah, blah. But I'm talking about elevating yourself, right? Moving from just a normal grad or normal employee to, oh, you stand out, you add value. What is that? You're not taught that in school. You're taught your basics, you're taught theory, you're taught this is what this is. This is an accounting standard. This is IFRS 3, this is IFRS 15. But you're not taught how to, elevate and add value, and you just get to work, you do your job.
Skills.
Yes, soft skills that have become so important in today.
That can catapult your career forward.
Exactly, because think about it, we are now in an era where we are all technically competent. The softer skills is what sets us apart, right? Your emotional intelligence, all those things that you were not taught. There isn't a course in varsity or in high school that says this is what you do. This is how you do it. This is how you sit. This is how you, there are those small things that really elevate a person that many people are not taught, and it depends on your environment, on your exposure, what you believe is possible for you. So that's why it's very important that we make sure, all of us, that young people are exposed. They're given the exposure they need to know that things are possible. How would a person know that it's possible to have a podcast? They just see you and they think, oh, Tato must be doing something amazing to be here. But it's like simple, it's action. You plan, you budget, you do everything, but it's just breaking it down for people so that it's realistic and they know that it's possible, to be a bonang. We were speaking about that just now.
I was saying that I'm trying to channel my inner bonang.
Exactly. You speak about that, and it's just like, it's the exposure. You saw bonang and you were like, I want to be bonang. Somebody's looking at you like, I want to be a tato. And it's about going back, breaking it down to say, how do you have a podcast? How do you do anything? Breaking it down, making it realistic, and being accessible so people know that it's possible. It's representation. When they say representation matters, it's not a small thing. It's really such an important thing that we don't prioritize enough.
It has a ripple effect. And I think, it also took courage. It took self-reflection. I think it's only when I started focusing on the non-technical part of my life, which obviously as you're growing up, you trying to get the technical base forward, the one that's now paying for, this lifestyle where you can have a reflection and not worry about material things like, is there food in the table?
Yeah.
How are you paying rent this much? So it's important to secure that. But it's also important to then realize that, like you said, if you didn't grow up in a certain environment, if you weren't exposed to certain things, you speak about being excluded. For instance, if you need to now understand that go back and say, okay, this is really what I experienced. And this is the perfect area where I can really enact really meaningful change, right? Because it's coming from within. Yeah, and you spoke about becoming a CA, right? So for a person who doesn't know what is a CA, I also know that, I've seen in varsity, CA people, that life, I don't wish for it. With those big
you can't say that
books.
You are an actuary.
4 exams in a row. And it's 2 per day or something wild like that. If you fail one, you repeat. It's so cutthroat. And then you also mentioned that you felt so, what was the most challenging thing about it, becoming a CA?
Sure. I think the most challenging part of becoming a chartered accountant is overcoming what you believe the journey should be. I was in the system from a young age, from grade 11, grade 12. I was already entrenched. PwC had been spotted me and said, yes, this is talent, young, smart, black girl. And I was going through a lot of the initiatives, and you do back work, you do all these things. They would have us over bowling. You speak to some of the partners, and you really get entrenched in the system. And you are taught. I remember I spoke to this lady. She was a partner, and she was telling me about her house and her life. She was single, and she's just living the best life. And that is just, you, as a young person, you're so impressionable, you know that you just see something and you're like, okay, this is it, right? So I had mapped it out. I was like, I was going to become a partner. I'm going to do my 7 years chartered accountant, then do my 5 years. I wanted to be those young partners. 28, your Funekas, your Merivilegases, I had seen them, I was gonna be them, and I think the most difficult part was reversing that and unlearning that and trying to map it out for myself. I'm not Funeka, I'm not Mary. They have their own journeys, they are brilliant journeys, but it's not my journey, and it was actually coming to kind of accepting my own journey and accepting that, oh yeah, maybe you fail, maybe you have to repeat. Maybe it took me 8 years to become a chartered accountant. It usually takes you 7 years. I always believed I was a record time kind of girl, I was like, girl,
you couldn't recognize yourself.
I had 4 distinctions. I was like, girl, I missed my 5th distinction by 2 marks. I'm always like, I'm 5 distinctions, but I'm 4. But being that kind of person, and I think you touched on something so important about accolades and how they form our own self-validation, our belief in ourselves. And I had to really detach from that as well, because as a person growing up, you don't want to be like, I'm a chartered accountant, and I'm this, I'm that. You are a person, you're a human. I'm a young girl from Atteridgeville, from a loving family, and I'm relearning to just detach from job titles and professions and XYZ, even though you've worked hard for them. But yeah, I think it was just that, embracing my own journey. That was what was difficult about being a chartered accountant, because I always believed I took other people's journeys and I was like, that's going to be my journey. But I had to embrace my own journey, my own learnings. Being in varsity, I was at UJ and they taught us a lot. A lot of the res cultures that have been cancelled now, I always believe I'm sad that they cancel, because they taught me so much, building communities. There are so many amazing young people that I became friends with, that are in my network now because of those cultures. We had concerts and dates. I don't know what the appropriate term is, but you get to know people, and it's just such a great experience to go through those things, and you learn a lot of emotional intelligence. I believe I'm a person who's very self-aware, solution-orientated, and a lot of that also came from university, and going through that experience. And I might have not passed in record time, but I think I'm very glad that I did prioritize that part, the softer skill part, because it has really propelled me, I believe, in my career and who I am, because of the experiences, because of the friends I have, that I gained from university, that I've experienced a lot with, that are still my friends to date, that have been with me till now through all the experiences I've had, through the passing and the failing and the everything. You have those people that come with balloons and cake and say, "Oh, sorry you failed." And when you pass, come with balloons and cake and say, "We are so glad you passed." And you feel seen and you feel heard. And to the point that I made earlier, it's just about being human, seeing each other, being accessible, being there. And we just keep striving to be better. Nobody's perfect, but you just keep striving to be better, to help others, to be the change you want to see.
And, it reminds me of like the fact that, failure builds character, and sometimes, when we do important things like this, I think that it is the most opportune times that God can deliver lessons to you. Because how else were you going to learn that if you had just blazed through and, you had to be prepared for the purpose that you're living now.
Yeah.
But really, I think when you're in such a situation, the most perfect thing to do is to accept, and to have a vision and to know deep down inside that you're destined for something greater. Do you feel the same?
I do. I think I've always felt like I'm destined for great things. It has also led to frustration, because we believe we are the masters of our own fate, even though we know we're not, I believe in God wholeheartedly. I've seen him carry me through many situations. And I do believe that journey that I walked, the failures that I've experienced, the exclusion, intentional or unintentional, those painful experiences have shaped who I am. I've looked at them positively in hindsight. Obviously, at the point, you're miserable, you are sad, you believe, why me? Why is this happening to me? I tried my best, I prepared, I did this, I did that. But I think that, you need to relinquish the power that you believe you have that is false belief in false power, because you do not dictate what happens to you. You only can control how you react to things. You cannot control what happens to you. You cannot control the promotion or not getting the promotion. You cannot control a lot of the things. You can only prepare your best, try your best, and hope it works out, right? And if it's destined for you and it's meant to be, it will be, And I think you just, it's a weird feeling to feel like you're destined for great things and not know what the great things are, But I think in my pursuit of those great things, I've known and I've felt that God has purposed me to help others, So that's what I do, try to do. A lot of the things, I have a full-time job, I'm sit at the table, I'm ex-co at YLC, I serve on NGO boards. It's very time consuming, A lot of my friends are just like, girl, what time? Where do you get the time to do all these things? But it's just things that you just trying to give back to until you find this greatness, and maybe the greatness is just plowing back, Greatness doesn't always have to be monetary. I like nice things. I really hope it's monetary.
And you deserve them. You worked very hard.
Yes, but it's in the interim, and it's not really an interim. I think it's just a way of living, where you always try to give back and plow back. And I don't know at what point the there's like a aha moment. I don't know. You just live your life, and you hope for the best, and you be a good person to people, and you hope that you bring a bit of sunshine in people's lives. And yeah.
You spoke about, I like it when you said, all those humble beginnings, those painful moments put you in a position where your career would be catapulted. I mean, now you're ahead. Because you've experienced those challenges and you failed a lot, have you ever struggled with because now, when the struggle is over, in your head, it might continue. You might have self-doubt, be insecure. Did you ever encounter something like that, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when we were together last month and we were speaking about me coming here, I was just like, that doesn't have to be me. And you were like, it's you. I'm like, and the way you were saying it was almost spiritual, like it's your time, You were so firm and this is what's happening. And, Tata, I can tell you for free, if I could choose a desired state for myself, I would be nameless, faceless, somewhere in the background, still doing the things that I do. I still find it a bit weird, these kind of things, like being invited to podcasts or to speak, or just like, me, why? Weird, And to your point about failure and the way you see yourself versus the way other people see you, I've this year tried to have positive affirmations. They will say, speak to yourself how you'd speak to someone you love. Like the people you love, you always motivating them, encouraging them. Oh, Tate is so beautiful. You're so smart. You whatever. But to yourself, I'm very hard on myself. I'm just like, you should have done this. Do this better. Do that better. And you have to overcome those things of not limiting yourself. I think I've been very cognizant of that in myself to say, I really would not want to be in the spotlight if I had a choice, But I think I've come to realize that it's important, like you're saying, you created a podcast saying Tsogang Bathong, because it's just like, wake up, and people need to wake up by telling their stories. I've been taught, even from my mentorship with Mom Tried like this, the power of storytelling. Even in my organization, our tagline is "Your story matters," and it resonates so much to me, because it's like, we need to tell our stories. There's that saying that, if the lion doesn't tell the story or whatever, the hunter gets the glory because they tell the story and something like that. But it's just saying that Tata must tell her story. Mothathe must tell her story, because if you don't tell your story, other people form narratives about you. You have to, because we publicize a lot of wrong things, on television and whatnot. But the good things, we don't publicize enough. I remember I was speaking to this amazing young lady, Bianca, and she's also in the NGO space doing a lot of great work for young people. And she said to me, it's so difficult to get positive content out there, to get positive messages out there, to get the viewership. I'm sure you have a podcast. You're like, guys, click what.
Ew, and when the viewers are very so hard to please. They demand the best.
Yeah, they do.
Otherwise, they don't talk one.
But it's so crazy, because makeup influencers, what have 2 million followers. You're like, are you guys serious? And it's not to say makeup is not great, blah, blah, blah. It's saying, if there's a podcast that's saying Tsogang Bathong, that's trying to empower people, that is bringing people on the ground, telling genuine stories that are empowering other people, do you not want that kind of content, you know? So it's just really about being intentional, you know. The failures that we experience as people are important. They shape who we are. And it's not to say when you're failing, you must be like, yay, I'm shaping who I am. Obviously, at the point, you kind of sit down and you reflect and you are sad, and that is acceptable. But you need to, at some point, get up and, you know, dust yourself off and say, how has this shaped me? How has it helped me grow? And how can I use this experience to help myself and to help others? We need to just think about outside of ourselves, you know? So, yeah, I think that for me is quite critical in those experiences that have shaped me. And like you're saying, to say, how do you overcome those? It's a daily journey. It's not a one day you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm great. I'm going to be on a podcast. I'm going to speak. I was just like, why am I going there? What am I going to say?
It's so scary.
Yeah.
Like, and you know, and you're following your purposes like that, because, you know, when you'll be sitting there and you'll just like get spiritually led and like something will push you in that direction, and say, you have to do it. You know, you don't have the skills. I mean, we're used to being experts at what we do, right? And then now you have to shift and you're not an expert. You're outside your comfort zone.
Yep.
And maybe that's why that's what those failures prepared us for, right? Because I do feel that, like I said, when you are experiencing the failures, it feels way like, because you don't have that understanding of the importance of that failure, then you tend to not even foresee the fact that that failure will set you apart at some point in future. So for you to get to the position that you're at, I'm sure what did you do? What is the corporate like etiquette that you have? Because being a head, not everybody gets there. You can be a CA or be an actuary, but you can reach a ceiling, right? So was it the experiences, your early experiences, that actually was able to set you apart and allow you to even surpass people who finished in record time?
That's a very good question. I think, firstly, I mean, it's kind of, it's God ordained, right? I think you don't ever want to sit in a position, or I don't ever want to sit in a position where I'm sitting here like, I did this and I did that and I'm better than Tato and I'm better than this. I'm not, you know. I think that there's a lot of things that are ordained by God that you get favor, right? I spoke about the power of mentorship. You know, the way people love reading, I love mentorship, in the sense that I love to hear personal stories, you know. A lot of my mentors, I just sit there and I listen to them. I listen to their stories. I listen to how they did things. And it's similar to like self-help books, right? Because that's why people write their journeys and people can read about them. I love to listen to them. And I believe that a lot of it came from, as I said, I'm very solution orientated. Like if you say to me, oh, this table is what, I was just like, let's fix it. Like I'm always just like, let's fix it. I'm a fixer, you know. I'm like Olivia Pope in my head. I'm just like fix things. And value adding. I always look at myself like I'm that chartered accountant that's like a hustler, you know. I'm not just all about books and theory. I think that's one thing that I came to grips with towards the end of my schooling career and going to work. You know, at first you're learning and you just want to regurgitate what you've learned and pass your exams and be a dark scholar and just pass and, get distinctions. But I think for me, as I grew up and as I was learning, I wanted to understand, how do you implement this? How do you do this? Adding value, even at work. I'm just like, okay, I do this. I'm very curious. I'm very inquisitive. I always ask questions. I remember when I first started at the bank that I work at, I was just like, oh my gosh, this guy that was training me, he always reminds me, he's like, I've never been asked so many questions in my life, because I asked about why we're doing this, why is it important, because it just speaks to why you're doing something. And a personal, not even a personal story, but a story that I love so much was, I was reading about it, just the story of taking a man to the moon. And I remember they spoke about there was a reporter at NASA that went there after they put a man on the moon, right, the first time. And he was asking people, the engineers, technicians, everyone, how does it feel to have achieved this big milestone? Everyone was speaking. And then as he walked out, there was a cleaner. And he was like, how does it feel? And he was like, I am so proud to be part of the team that took a man to the moon. And it's just about knowing that whatever thing you're doing, whatever Thato's doing at work, it fits to a greater scheme of things, I'm always very pro-purpose, even at work, you don't just do your recon and say, I did my recon, it's going. How does it feed into the greater scheme of things? I'm in trade finance, I'm in the payment space. I enable payments for the diaspora. It's an important task, Thato can make a payment from UK to Mafikeng somewhere, to an aunt, to whoever. And that is important, It's important to know how what you do feeds into the greater scheme of things, how it impacts people on the ground. It's not just the recon, it's not just the whatever. It's actually contributing to society. And you always have to look at what you're doing in that lens to say, oh, how does this actually impact someone on the ground? And that is very critical for me in anything that I do.
I share the same sentiment. I think, if you don't link your job somehow to a greater purpose, it's
draining.
It's draining because you're in a society and you can't really link what you do every day most of the time to what happens outside of your work. So it kind of creates this dichotomy within you. And I went through a similar thing, I sell investment products, and for people who are in retirement, that's important, for them to get that safety. But from what I can see, me and you, that wasn't enough. We even had to go outside of our work to fulfill a greater mission. So what would you say, how can other CAs drive impactful change? What skills can they use outside of work to benefit society? Because we spend most of the time in these corporations, people who are employed, catering to, I cater mostly to affluent clients and stuff like that. But how do you then go outside and then use that skill to be closer to the ground?
I think you really need to ask yourself, who does not have access to what I have access to, right? Like you speak about helping affluent people, but there's a person in the township, in the rural area, who also needs to retire, who also needs retirement funds, who also needs to be comfortable when they're retired. So how are you helping that person? Because you already have the skills, you already have the knowledge, right? All the things that we're gaining in these spaces that we're in, that we're privileged to be in, you need to always think, who is not as privileged as I am right now? I always say to people, people always want somebody else to help them and, oh, okay, I'm not as influential. You are influential. You are in a position of power where you are, As Tato, you know how many people. You are part of a seat at the table. You're part of our global ambassadors. You have access to these networks. What are you doing with them? If there's a child somewhere in the Northwest that wants to be a chartered accountant, that wants to be an engineer, that wants to be whatever, you know those people, you know accomplished people in those spaces. So you need to go back and say, oh, I know Mothathe, hey, please can you mentor this person? Please can you have a phone call with this person? Can you just share a bit of your experience, help guide them, make this thing a real thing for them, So I think that we don't always have to be thinking, oh, I'm just this junior person in this corporation. You have influence. You have access to things that other people don't have. How many people can speak to Punki Modise, Mam Triforsa, Mam Futim Toba? You were in that space with those women, or Mam Lerato, people that have accomplished big things. And you're saying, I don't have anything. I can't help anyone. That's not true, So it's just about looking outside of yourself to say, this skill that I have, chartered accountants, contrary to popular belief, people just believe, everything about money and whatever. And I think that's not what we taught. The course is not about money. It's just obviously gives you a lot of financial acumen. But it does not necessarily mean you know how to spend your rands and cents, right? But for the ones that do know and that have become a student, that you can help other people, saving, financial literacy. There are a lot of things we can all do, to help other people. You having this podcast is helping other people. You could be doing something else with your money, with your time on a Saturday. You didn't need to be here, but it's plowing back and saying, how do we reach more people? No one now can have an excuse to say, I don't know. There's all these resources, right? We're all kind of putting in our efforts to say, how do we help the next person? How do we reach that person? Maybe I'm not able to go there physically and sit there with someone in Pretoria, but doing this is you reaching other people. So I think for me, to answer your question, it's just looking outside of yourself, looking at what access you have, looking at what privilege you have, and saying, how can I share it? How can I amplify it? And how can I grow someone else?
What I like from your journey, it seems like the recipe was hard work, being smart, and most importantly, being inquisitive.
Yeah.
That curiosity, that's the one that made you go to PwC, apply. That's the thing that made you seek out mentorship opportunities, which you mentioned was very key in your journey. So in closing, when you think of South Africa's future, especially its youth, what kind of world do you hope they'll create? And what is your vision for South Africa?
Oh, it's a lot. When I was at PwC in United States, I worked there for a bit. And I remember when they offered me a job and they were like, no, don't leave. You can stay. Let's extend. We're looking to keep you full time. I wanted to come back primarily because I'm so passionate about South Africa and about Africa, and just knowing the amount of potential we have in our continent. It's so beautiful. And I wanted to be part of building that. I think we are very fortunate, to live in the post-apartheid era. And we know that people sacrificed. There were lives lost so we can have the privilege we have today. That Tato can even imagine and have a podcast, have access and resources to do this. 50 years ago, a Black young lady could never even imagine having this opportunity. So I think for me, the South Africa that I want to be part of building is a South Africa where, firstly, people don't have to struggle with the economics of the stomach. You cannot make, decisions, feasible decisions when you're hungry. You just need to be in a state where people just have food on the table. Can we get to a point where there is dignity for everyone? As part of the SDG goals. And it's just human dignity, guys. Just a life where a person has food, has access to education, has access to water, just basic needs. Let's get to a country where nobody is sleeping with a hungry or empty stomach. Second is access. I'm very big on access. I'm very big on exposure. I'm very big on everyone must have the same access. We're always bombarded with these articles about the top schools, how much they cost, the elite schools. We just got the matric results last month and it was like, ooh, this saint, what saint this, hey, Hilton, hey, what. And you're like, that's a small group of people. What about Ramatlo High School? What? All those things, it's like, if you want that, why shouldn't you have access to it? There's a child in wherever, some rural area that wants education of a certain caliber. Why shouldn't they get it? Why should there be young people studying under a tree? So I think for me, it's just about that access to say any child, even wherever, Amazim Dodi or Emlazi, wherever, should be able to access people, have access to opportunities, and be able to create a livelihood for themselves, whatever that looks like. And it's so beautiful now that even the entertainment space and all of that, artisans, people that it's careers that are becoming more popular in this day and age. You see DJ Waffles and all of making a lot of money, making more money than we do, as professionals in corporate. So we're seeing professionals outside of corporate, in entertainment spaces, in different fields. And we're saying more of that, any person should be able to do what they're passionate about, what they work hard at, do it well, and be able to live off that. So that's just the future that I'd like to see for South Africa, a future where we just are able to be the best versions of ourselves, where people don't have to look to crime and those kind of things to survive, to feed themselves, to, where we are in communities where it's not the gangsters that are popular, but it's the tatos that are popular. It's like, oh, she's an actuary. She grew up in my township. She grew up in my village. She grew up in my suburb. Wherever you are, you see people that look like you, that sound like you, that are accepted. We don't all have to sound the same, look the same, behave the same. We're not the same people. People just can be diverse and be themselves and be accepted.
Thanks for sharing your incredible journey with us. It's conversations like this that remind us that each one of us can create a ripple effect of change, no matter how small it may seem. To everyone listening, remember, seeds of greatness are already within you. Stay inspired, courageous, and remember, Tsogang Batong.